Peter, the question of free will has been one of philosophy. Libraries like this could be literally filled with the discussions and written material of philosophers over the centuries. In recent decades, neuroscientists have said that we can almost throw out all that philosophy because we now have some real data about what's happening in the brain, and the whole discussion of free will is thrown out because there is no free will, and you can show that by various brain processes. How do you evaluate, as a neuroscientist, how do you evaluate the neuroscientific attack on the philosophy of free will?
Right. So I think actually most of my neuroscientist colleagues are not philosophically well informed. They're making pretty radical statements on the basis of extremely thin and questionable data, like that we are meat puppets simply because of the existence of a readiness potential. So there have been two classes of attack from neuroscience. One centered on the Libet experiments, the other centered on the Wegner experiments. And both of these, I think, are largely not relevant to the question of free will where it actually takes place, which is mental deliberation and weighing of options for future action. Now, why?
So let's go into each one of those. Tell me what they are briefly, and then why you think neither one apply to free will, whereas most neuroscientists think they do.
Okay. So first, the Libet paradigm. There were two German scientists, Dieck and Kornhuber, who noticed that before an action, like lifting your finger, there was a readiness potential that preceded it. The innovation
in the brain, in the motor area particularly.
Right, basically at the top of your head in these so-called pre-motor planning areas. The innovation of Libet was to introduce this clock such that people could then say, I chose to, or I became conscious of the urge to move at this point. And then that was followed by the motor act. What was surprising about that was that the conscious urge to move was very late in the game. So you had this readiness potential building up at roughly from 2 seconds on up. And then, this might be, say, minus 300-400 before the actual motor act, people became conscious of
less than half a second. Yeah.
Less than half a second, and then they moved. And many people said, well, see, the decision is made long before you're conscious of it, therefore consciousness played no role in making the decision. Now, the question then is, what is the role of consciousness here? Is consciousness actually making a decision here, or is it an assignment after the fact that yes, what is about to happen, I did, or I'm in charge of? And I think it's the latter. There's a comparison between what is planned and what is now being executed, and if it matches, you become conscious of the feeling, I am going to do this. I have the urge to do this. I did this, or I'm doing this. So this is rooted in an old model of Helmholtz that involves a comparison between what's planned and what is actually happening. If they match, you say, I did it. That's mine. I'm the author of that. I caused that. If they don't match, you say, I didn't do it. That's what I think is the role of consciousness in this domain. Well, that's not very relevant to the role of consciousness in deliberation, where we're considering multiple options and weighing our options in light of criteria that might be very elaborate.
Even though the readiness potential is occurring before that conscious awareness.
Absolutely. Nobody doubts that. But the role of consciousness here might not be what people think it is. It's not that consciousness is causing the motor act. It's a retrospective evaluation of what was planned and what is now being executed. And saying, yep, they match. I'm causal. I caused that. Now, I think something very similar is going on in the Wegner paradigm. Now, Wegner has lots of experiments, but what they all seem to have in common is typically a hand movement where someone comes to the conclusion, yes, I did that, when in fact they didn't. Or the opposite, where they say, no, I didn't do that, but in fact they did. And this is closely related to what's called the rubber hand illusion, where you say that this rubber hand is part of my body when it in fact isn't. And the way you do that is you put a rubber hand here that looks like someone's hand, and then you put their actual hand under the table, and then you touch, so they don't see the real hand, and you touch the rubber hand at the moment that someone else touches this hand. And because you have that feedback, you see that hand being touched and you feel it being touched, you then say, oh, that rubber hand is my hand. So that's a misassignment of self. I think in the Wegner paradigm, there's a misassignment of self in the sense of the self having caused something. But both the Libet paradigm and the Wegner paradigm are involving this comparative mechanism, Helmholtz called it corollary discharge or efferent's copy, that then allows there to be an assignment of selfhood or self, that the self had caused something. But that's retrospective. It's not about the future at all. Where science needs to look for free will is in the domain where it's actually operative, which is prospective judgments of what to do in the future, where you consider multiple options. So I think it was very useful for us to confront the main lines of attack, and I think the field hopefully can now zoom in on where the action likely really is.
But the fundamental conventional wisdom in the field of neuroscience that has existed for several decades is that their work, because of Libet and Wegner, negates a lot of the philosophical analysis. And what you're saying is that's not the case, and you almost have to go back to square one.
Well, philosophy has its own problems, right? But I can name a bunch of them, but I don't think what the neuroscientists have been saying proves that there's no free will. I think that that's just wrong. It might prove that consciousness is not causal of immediately simultaneous or immediately subsequent acts. And that might be correct, but that doesn't prove that there's no free will. I mean, for example, what I think Wegner did, for example, is come up with lots of illusions of volition. You feel like you did it, but you didn't, or you feel like you didn't do it and you did. Well, I am operative in visual neuroscience. I can come up with visual illusions, but I would never conclude from that all vision is an illusion. And I think it's a mistake to conclude that from the fact that there are illusions of volition, that volition is always an illusion, that there's no capacity in which volition can make a difference in subsequent acts.